Ma'am, you now legally owe me $350 in lower back hire for living in my storage. That is what I advised the HOA Karen, who'd been terrorizing our neighborhood for 8 years. The appearance on her face, priceless. She went from boastful and entitled to completely speechless in about 2 seconds flat. This woman idea she should park her BMW in my storage each time she desired, hand out bogus fines like Halloween sweet, and essentially deal with me like her personal doormat. What she failed to understand is that her entitled behavior had accidentally made her my tenant below kingdom regulation. So, what's the pettiest thing an HOA has ever finished to you? Drop those stories in the feedback and allow me recognize wherein you're looking from. Through day 5, she changed into begging to pay lease simply to get her automobile lower back. Let me show you precisely how Karen's very own arrogance have become her downfall. My call's Jake, and 3 months in the past, I was just a 34-year antique IT contractor trying to start over after a messy divorce. My grandmother had left me her little house in Pine Ridge, a modest 1960s ranch with white shutters and a detached single-car garage that smelled like old motor oil and forgotten goals. The scent hit me each time I opened that storage door, mixing WD-40 with a long time of stored Christmas decorations and the faint echo of my grandfather's woodworking projects. I would moved in to heal. Absolutely. Financially stretched. Emotionally tired. Simply wanting a quiet vicinity to rebuild my life. The residence become ideal besides for the HOA. Input Karen Whitmore. 52 years vintage, 8 years as HOA board treasurer, and the sort of female who handled a clipboard like a weapon of mass destruction. She drove a white BMW X5 that she stored spotless, lived in the most important house on our block, and had this perfectly styled bob that by no means moved, even in hurricane-pressured winds. I swear that girl's hair had its personal structural engineering diploma. But right here's what made Karen dangerous. She failed to just put in force HOA rules. She weaponized them, and she had a pattern. Ask anybody in Pine Ridge who'd been targeted via Karen's enforcement campaigns, and also you'd observe something exciting. Single mother and father, elderly oldsters on fixed incomes, the younger Hispanic-owned family with youngsters who played too loudly. All people who didn't inshape Karen's vision of suburban perfection got the remedy. My first actual encounter with Karen befell on day 3 after moving in. I'm operating from home, looking to awareness on debugging some purchasers' community issues, when I hear the unique purr of her BMW pulling into my driveway. No big deal, proper. Maybe she's being neighborly, bringing a welcome basket or something, right? I walk out of doors and discover her BMW sitting in my storage. No longer near it, not beside it, interior it. She's status there in her clothier denims and crisp white shirt, clutching that damned clipboard, searching at me like I'm the only who's misplaced. Excuse me, I say, seeking to be polite due to the fact I am new and don't want community drama. It truly is my garage. She seems up from her clipboard and I can scent her perfume from 10 feet away. This overwhelming floral assault that likely charges greater than my monthly grocery finances. Emergency HOA assembly, she says, like that explains the whole thing. Your driveway become closest. The audacity became breathtaking. I need to get my equipment out for a patron process. May want to you please circulate your car? Karen's heels click on in opposition to the concrete as she walks past me, absolutely ignoring my request. I will move it while I am true and prepared, she says over her shoulder. Perhaps you should learn to be extra network-minded. And just like that, she changed into gone, leaving her BMW in my garage like she owned the vicinity. 6 hours. 6 hours her automobile sat there whilst I couldn't get admission to my camping gear, my toolbox, something I'd stored in there. I needed to reschedule a customer appointment due to the fact I couldn't get to my gadget. Whilst Karen eventually got here back. No apology, no acknowledgement. She acted like she changed into doing me a want by way of doing away with her car for my belongings. That night, I stood in my grandmother's kitchen, searching at her antique image on the windowsill, feeling like I used to be already failing her reminiscence. She'd been tough, the form of girl who'd fought the city council to get avenue lighting established on our block back inside the 80s. What could she think about her grandson getting driven around via some HOA queen with a superiority complex? The crunching sound of gravel underneath Karen's tires as she'd finally pulled away kept echoing in my head. That sound, blended with the lingering chemical sweetness of her fragrance in my garage, told me everything I had to understand approximately my new neighbor. This wasn't over. Karen had just declared conflict, and she or he had no idea she'd picked the wrong target. The following morning, I wake up to discover 3 shiny yellow violation notices taped to the front door like a few kind of suburban scarlet letter. My coffee turned into nonetheless brewing when I peeled them off, and the morning dew made the ink slightly smudged. But now, not smudged enough to cover what Karen had carried out. Violation primary, unapproved mailbox shade. Apparently, my grandmother's black mailbox violated a few difficult-to-understand covenant about earth tone coordination with community aesthetic standards. $50 first rate. Violation variety, excessive window coverings. My bedroom blinds were supposedly non-compliant with network visibility requirements. Another $50. Violation variety 3, improper trash bin placement. My garbage can became allegedly placed 4 and too close to the road. You guessed it, $50 more dollars. Every violation got here with a crisp 10-day correction length and a handwritten observe in Karen's ideal cursive. Welcome to the neighborhood. We hold requirements here. The passive, competitive smiley face she'd drawn at the quit made my blood pressure spike. Right, here's the element about revenge. It's first class served with the aspect of documentation. So, in preference to storming over to Karen's house like she probably predicted, I fired up my computer and started digging. The mechanical clicking of my keyboard at 7 within the morning likely annoyed my neighbors, but I used to be on a challenge. First discovery. Karen had filed all 3 violations at the same day as our storage incident. Now not suspicious in any respect proper? Second discovery. In line with the HOA Management Agency's online portal, board participants wished a majority vote before issuing citations. Karen's violations filed unilaterally. No board approval documented anywhere. But right here's in which it gets interesting. I known as the HOA Management Business Enterprise directly, and after 20 mins of preserve song that gave the impression of elevator jazz mixed with a person's fever dream, I were given related to a tired-sounding lady named Beth. Hello. I'm calling about some violation notices I acquired. I wanted to confirm the filing tactics. Oh, sure, honey. What is your cope with? I provide her my cope with and that I listen typing in the historical past. It really is thrilling, Beth says, and I can pay attention her frowning through the phone. These violations were filed with the aid of Karen Whitmore. But there's no file of board approval. Truly, searching at her filing history, that is a sample. My coffee went bloodless as Beth explained that Karen were issuing unauthorized violations for months, perhaps years. The control employer have been processing them robotically, assuming board approval existed. However, after they started out auditing files after some resident lawsuits, they discovered Karen were working like her personal quotation machine. So those violations are invalid, I requested. Technically, sure. And in case you want my unofficial advice, request receipt documentation for every HOA pleasant you pay. Many board participants pocket that money in place of setting it in community budget. Expertise nugget primary parents. Continually demand itemized receipts for HOA fines and affirm board approval through your management corporation. Unauthorized citations are greater commonplace than you would think. But Karen wasn't done with me. Oh no, this was just the opening act. That afternoon, I am drafting a polite however firm email to the HOA board, worrying dismissal of Karen's bogus violations, when I hear that acquainted BMW purr in my driveway. I look out my window and there she is again, pulling directly into my storage like she owns the place. This time she doesn't even fake there's an emergency. She simply parks, gets out, and leaves another handwritten notice underneath my windshield wiper. Complaints could be cited to your everlasting record. Network cooperation is anticipated. The audacity become genuinely astounding. Right here, I'm documenting her violation of actual legal guidelines, and he or she responds by means of violating my belongings once more, while threatening me with some imaginary permanent record like we're in essential school. However, Karen had made a crucial mistake. See, I had hooked up a protection camera device the day after transferring in. Not anything fancy, just a few primary wireless cameras I picked up online. The photos of her first storage invasion were useful for my own statistics. But this second incident, this became 24-karat gold. I now had documented proof of trespassing, evidence of retaliatory harassment, and a clean pattern of Karen treating my personal belongings like her non-public parking garage. Greater importantly, I had timestamps showing she began using my storage area without permission at the same time as simultaneously submitting bogus violations against me. That night, I sat in my grandmother's old recliner, going through my photos and documentation. The leather turned into worn easy from many years of use, and it still smelled faintly of her lavender soap. I should nearly listen her voice. Jake, honey, bullies handiest recognize one language, electricity. The espresso rain stains on my laptop display from days of past due night studies couldn't cover the reality staring again at me. Karen thought she turned into playing chess even as I was gambling checkers. Little did she recognize I used to be approximately to change the entire recreation. 2 days later, Karen decided to call in reinforcements. And by using reinforcements, I imply her little circle of HOA cronies, 3 different better halves who reputedly had nothing better to do than terrorize their associates for game. First came Linda, Karen's lieutenant, driving a silver Lexus and carrying what gave the look of an professional inspection tick list. She spent 20 minutes walking around my property, taking images of my lawn with the determination of a criminal offense scene investigator. The grass was apparently irregularly maintained according to a few subsection of the covenant I'd by no means heard of. Then got here Patricia, clipboard in hand, measuring the precise top of my outside solar lighting with a literal ruler. Turns out they have been 1 to 1 inch too tall and solid non-compliant shadows at the sidewalk. I watched this overall performance from my kitchen window whilst consuming a sandwich, questioning if those ladies had ever considered getting actual pastimes. The grand finale was Susan, who spent 15 mins photographing my mailbox from each doable attitude like she'd become documenting evidence for the International Criminal Court. Reputedly, the small dent from in which the preceding proprietor had sponsored into it constituted neighborhood aesthetic degradation. By using Noon, I had 3 more violation notices, $50 each, obviously. Karen's private signature on every single one, together with any other passive competitive notice. Network standards advantage anyone. Compliance ensures property values. But here's where Karen's approach backfired spectacularly. See, while her Imply Girls membership turned into busy gambling assets inspector, I used to be constructing my very own community, and it seems I wasn't the best one who'd been focused by means of the Pine Ridge Enforcement Squad. Mrs. Chen, my 78-year-old neighbor, knocked on my door that afternoon wearing a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Her palms have been shaking barely, no longer from age, however from anger. "You need to recognize about Karen?" she said, settling into my grandmother's old kitchen chair. "Allow me display you what she did to us." The folder contained 2 years of violation notices, $50 fines for the entirety from immoderate garden gnome shows to unauthorized chicken feeding stations. Mrs. Chan and her husband had paid over 3,000 in bogus fines earlier than their son in the end intervened and threatened prison motion. But Mrs. Chen wasn't alone. She delivered me to the Rodriguez-owned family, who'd been fined repeatedly for their kids' toys being visibly stored in their personal outside. And to Bill Henderson, a veteran in his 60s who'd racked up masses in fines because Karen decided his service canine's water bowl become an unapproved outdoor fixture. The pattern was crystal clear. Karen focused all of us who did not healthy her vision of suburban perfection, aged oldsters, households with younger children, all of us who regarded unique or had much less cash to combat back. She changed into walking a systematic harassment marketing campaign, masquerading as HOA enforcement. That night I made a discovery that modified the whole thing, whilst getting to know assets law for my very own scenario, because permits be honest, I was getting determined. I stumbled throughout something called negative possession statutes. However, greater importantly, I found references to involuntary tenancy and landlord abandonment laws. The prison idea is truly pretty honest. If someone makes use of your home time and again along with your know-how and you don't take instantaneous movement to evict them, the regulation can recollect them a tenant with actual criminal rights. More bizarrely, if that tenant leaves personal belongings for your premises, precise landlord-tenant laws kick in. I spent the subsequent 3 hours down a felony rabbit hole that might make any regulation scholar proud. My PC screen glowed inside the darkish kitchen even as I clicked through statute after statute, go referencing case law and priority. The odor of reheated pizza blended with the faint scent of my grandmother's lavender dish cleaning soap, nonetheless lingering within the sink. Then it hit me like a lightning bolt. Erin have been the use of my garage repeatedly. She'd stored HOA elements and private gadgets there. I had security footage documenting her access and use below nation regulation. Her repeated use of my assets, blended together with her garage of private property, should legally establish a landlord-tenant dating, which supposed Karen Whitmore, HOA board treasurer and community tyrant, had accidentally emerged as my tenant, and she failed to even are aware of it. The irony changed into really delicious. Here she turned into trying to manipulate my property through bogus violations, while simultaneously growing a legal state of affairs, wherein I ought to control her through real tenancy law. I leaned again in my grandmother's chair, taking note of the old residents settle round me, and started out to grin for the first time in weeks. Karen thought she'd become playing chess even as I fumbled around with checkers. She had no idea I was approximately to turn the complete board. Karen's subsequent move turned into truly nuclear. 3 days after her inspection squad completed their reign of terror, I got a knock on my door that made my blood run cold. Standing on my porch changed into a Metropolis building inspector with a clipboard, tough hat, and the kind of expression that counseled my day changed into approximately to get a good deal worse. Mr. Thompson, I am here about a grievance concerning an unpermitted structure and potential zoning violations. My heart sank. I am sorry, what? The inspector, a center-aged man named Rodriguez, consulted his office work. We received a report which you're operating an illegal commercial enterprise from your garage, violating residential zoning ordinances. Also, claims of structural modifications with outlets in. I stood there in my espresso-stained tea blouse looking to method what I used to be hearing. The morning air carried the fragrance of autumn leaves and coming near doom. Commercial enterprise. What enterprise? IT consulting? In step with the complainant. Record says you've made unauthorized adjustments, such as extra electrical work and ventilation structures. The pieces clicked together like a puzzle product of pure malice. Karen had referred to as the Metropolis, fabricated lies about me jogging a commercial enterprise for my storage, and become seeking to get my belongings retagged. This lady had escalated from petty HOA harassment to probably making my home uninhabitable. However, here's the factor about being an IT man. We are without a doubt excellent at documentation. Am I able to ask who filed the complaint? I said, already understanding the solution. Rodriguez flipped through his papers. Karen Whitmore, HOA board member. She supplied quite a detailed document with photos and timestamps. Of route, she did. I spent the next hour strolling Rodriguez through my assets facts. Seems my garage was constructed in 1962. Completely accepted and documented within the town's personal documents. I pulled up the authentic construction permits at the town website while Rodriguez watched, his expression shifting from respectable skepticism to expert annoyance. Those facts show the storage become legally constructed, he stated, evaluating his paperwork to my display, and I don't see any evidence of commercial activity. Then I confirmed him something that made his jaw tighten. Karen's complaint contained more than one demonstrably false statements. Now, not simply incorrect, but deliberately fabricated. She'd claimed I would added electrical shops for business system when the retailers were original to the 1962 creation. She'd suggested commercial-grade airflow structures that were really simply the same old garage door opener my grandfather had mounted in the 80s. Mr. Thompson, Rodriguez said, remaining his folder with a decisive snap that echoed within the quiet storage. Filing fake reviews with the town is a critical depend. This complaint appears to include a couple of deliberate inaccuracies. However, Karen wasn't accomplished. While Rodriguez became finishing his inspection, bet whose white BMW came purring into my driveway. Karen herself, likely expecting to watch my garage get condemned. As an alternative, she walked right into a scene wherein a Metropolis inspector was documenting her false statements. Mrs. Whitmore, Rodriguez called out as Karen approached. I want to invite you approximately this file you filed. The color drained from Karen's face faster than water down a drain. Oh, nicely. I used to be just involved about network protection and property values. Your file claims unauthorized electrical paintings, but Metropolis records display all electric changed into established at some point of authentic production. You also said business airflow that does not exist. Can you explain those discrepancies? Aaron started stammering, approximately just trying to assist in keeping community standards. However, Rodriguez wasn't buying it. He explained that fake reports waste city assets and might bring about monetary penalties. Looking Karen squirm below reliable scrutiny changed into like watching a vampire meet sunlight. All her self-assurance evaporated the moment she confronted a person with real electricity who wasn't intimidated with the aid of her clipboard. But this disagreement gave me something even extra treasured than satisfaction. It gave me the final piece of my felony puzzle. That nighttime, I called my buddy Rick, a legal professional who owed me a prefer from whilst I might constant his workplace community at some stage in their ransomware disaster. I defined Karen's escalating harassment sample, her repeated unauthorized use of my garage, and her tries to damage my assets. Jake, Rick said after being attentive to my tale, what you're describing sounds like she may have accidentally created a landlord-tenant courting. How's that work? She's been the usage of your garage again and again, storing her stuff there, treating it like her own space. If you may report constant use over time, there is felony precedent for involuntary tenancy. My coronary heart began racing. What might that suggest? A way she could legally be your tenant. You may call for returned lease, establish formal hire phrases, or provoke eviction court cases. Report the whole thing due to the fact this may get very thrilling. I hung up and regarded round my grandmother's kitchen, feeling her preventing spirit coursing through my veins. The heady scent of her old lavender soap still lingered faintly, blending with the odor of bloodless pizza I might forgotten at the counter. Karen idea she ought to break my life with lies and intimidation. She had no idea she'd simply exceeded me the keys to her own downfall. The following morning, I sat in Rick's cramped law workplace that smelled like antique leather and clean coffee, watching him flip through printouts of my security footage and documentation. His desk became included with regulation books and empty electricity drink cans. "Jake, this is actually amazing," Rick stated, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Karen's repeated use of your garage genuinely meets the standards for involuntary tenancy under state law." He pulled out a thick prison guide and started studying. "Take a look at this. While in person makes use of personal property time and again with the proprietor's expertise, stores private property on stated property, and establishes a pattern of normal get entry to. The law might also understand an implied landlord-tenant relationship." My espresso cup paused midway to my lips. "Are you pronouncing what I think you're saying?" "I am saying Karen Whitmore has been your unauthorized tenant for 6 weeks, and she or he doesn't even are aware of it." Rick grinned like a shark. "Better yet, she's been storing HOA elements for your garage. Under landlord-tenant regulation, it's abandoned belongings if she leaves it without paying hire. The prison implications hit me like a freight teach. So what does that mean?" Rick started counting on his palms. "First, you may call for again rent for her use of the distance. Fair market rate for storage garage is ready $150 a month. She's been the usage of your garage for 6 weeks, so that's more or less $225 in lower back rent. However, wait, there may be more." He persisted. "Past due fees, inconvenience charges, and application expenses deliver her total debt to around $350. And right here's the beautiful component. As her landlord, you have legal rights to relax the belongings if lease is not paid." My head became spinning. "Comfy the property. You could legally lock the garage with her stuff inside till she can pay what she owes. It's called a landlord's lien. And if she would not pay within the statutory notice period, you could put off the deserted belongings." The irony turned into best. Karen were using my garage like she owned it, treating me like a few powerless victim. As a substitute, her entitled conduct had accidentally made her my tenant with real criminal obligations. But right here's the most beautiful component. Rick stated, "Examine your protection photos timestamps. Karen's been having access to your storage the use of her personal key." I blinked. Her personal key? She needed to get that key somewhere. Either she made an unauthorized reproduction or a person gave her access. Either manner, it proves she's been treating your storage like her non-public garage unit. Rick pulled out a felony form and commenced writing. "We're going to serve her with a proper notice of tenancy and lease demand. Licensed mail completely by the ebook. She'll have 7 days to respond after receiving observe." The smell of his coffee blended with musty law books. As Rick explained the timeline, she can pay the returned lease and set up a formal rent, dispute the teeny declare in court, or face eviction proceedings. And she ignores it. Then we report for eviction, and her BMW will become collateral for unpaid hire. Rick's grin were given wider. "Jake." She walked right into the most best legal trap I have ever seen. I sat there in stunned silence, feeling like I might been playing chess while questioning it changed into checkers. Karen's harassment, her storage use, her storage of objects, it had all been constructing in the direction of this moment in which her behavior gave me prison electricity over her. Understanding nugget number 2. Belongings regulation is complicated, but repeated use of someone's space with garage of private gadgets can create involuntary tenancy relationships that give landlords great prison rights. Rick surpassed me the finished observe. "Welcome to being Karen's landlord, Jake. Something tells me she's no longer going to take this nicely." Over the next 3 days, I assembled what I like to name my Justice League. A ragtag crew of acquaintances who'd been waiting years for a person to ultimately stand up to Karen's reign of terror. First recruit Mrs. Chen, who showed up at my door with a manila folder thick enough to forestall a bullet, and eyes that glinted with the kind of revenge simplest a 78 12 months vintage grandmother can properly execute. "Jake, honey," she stated, settling into my kitchen. "I've been preserving information for 2 years. Karen targeted my rose garden, my chicken feeders, even my grandson's bicycle. Time to use this." Mrs. Chen's documentation become extremely good. Pictures, timestamps, copies of each bogus violation, be aware. She'd even recorded some of Karen's competitive confrontations on her phone. The woman became essentially a one-person surveillance operation, disguised as a candy elderly neighbor. Next came the Rodriguez circle of relatives, Maria and Carlos, in conjunction with their 8-year-old twins, who'd been fined repeatedly for having the audacity to personal toys. Carlos labored in production and understood property regulation higher than maximum legal professionals. "Guy, what you're doing is genius," Carlos stated, reviewing Rick's criminal approach. "Karen's been acting like she owns all of us as property. Time she discovered about real ownership rights." Maria pulled out her personal folder. "She fined us $200 our ultimate month due to the fact Elena's chalk artwork was defacing community sidewalks. It became hopscotch squares." Then there was Bill Henderson, the 63 12-months vintage veteran whose provider dog have been declared an unapproved outdoor fixture by way of Karen's twisted interpretation of HOA regulations. Bill introduced experience managing bureaucratic nonsense and unshakable calm. "Son," Bill stated, inspecting Rick's legal office work, "that is the maximum beautiful aspect I have ever seen. You are the use of her own weapons in opposition to her." My secret weapon changed into Rick's criminal knowledge. He spent hours on foot us through landlord-tenant regulation, explaining our rights and Karen's duties in easy terms. "Right here's the beautiful factor about involuntary tenancy," Rick explained to our organization gathered in my dwelling room. "It's no longer some difficult-to-understand legal loophole. It's mounted law designed to guard belongings proprietors from exactly this case." He pulled out a whiteboard and started drawing diagrams. The first step: serve the awareness of tenancy through certified mail. Step 2: watch for Karen's reaction. Step 3: record the entirety she does later on. The technical guidance was where my IT history without a doubt shined. I upgraded my security digital camera gadget, set up audio recording skills, and set up computerized cloud backup. Every interplay with Karen could be documented in high definition with crystal clean audio. Knowledge nugget variety 3. Whilst handling assets disputes, comprehensive documentation trumps everything. Courts love timestamps, video proof, and certified mail shipping confirmations. Mrs. Chen counseled we coordinate our reaction. If Karen retaliates towards Jake, she'll possibly expand her harassment of everybody. We need to be equipped. However, we created a community communication network, group textual content messages, shared image folders, coordinated documentation. If Karen tried to goal any folks, the others would without delay start recording. Carlos came up with the first-rate idea of getting to know honest market condominium costs. "If this goes to court, you want rock-strong numbers. I know 3 one-of-a-kind storage facilities we can get rates from. We observed that garage space in our place rented for among $140 and $160 in step with month. Karen's 6 weeks of usage, plus late prices and utility prices, easily justified the $350 call for Rick had calculated." Bill suggested we research Karen's very own property for potential violations. "Understand your enemy," he said with military precision. "If she wants to play with the aid of HOA rules, allows make sure she's following them herself." That research was enlightening. Karen's personal property had at the least 4 violations she'd by some means by no means stated herself for. An unapproved garden shed, outdoor lights that handed top restrictions, and a mailbox that failed to inshape the permitted color palette. The mental training becomes simply as essential. Rick coached me on staying calm for the duration of confrontations, documenting the whole lot and by no means dropping my mood, irrespective of how outrageous Karen's behavior have become. "She's going to enhance while she receives this observe," Rick warned. "Expect the absolute worst behavior you've got ever visible from her. However, this is simply proper. The extra unhinged she gets, the higher your case turns into." Mrs. Chen patted my hand with the self-belief of someone who'd raised 6 kids. "Honey, bullies like Karen were getting away with their behavior for see you later. They have forgotten that moves have results." Time to remind her. As we finished our making plan session, I seemed round my grandmother's residing room at this not-going alliance. The past due afternoon daylight streamed through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing inside the air and the decided expressions on all of us' faces. Karen had spent years dividing and conquering this neighborhood via fear and intimidation. She was approximately to find out what occurs, while her victims ultimately unite and fight lower back with real criminal guns. The licensed mail Be Aware was added on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. I recognize this because Karen's response became so surprising that 3 different neighbors texted me the exact timestamp of while she started out screaming in her driveway. The attention turned into stunning in its simplicity. Legit letterhead, prison language, and a clear message. Word of landlord-tenant dating and demand for rent. Rick had crafted it perfectly, explaining that Karen owed me $350 for her unauthorized garage use. Karen's first reaction came precisely 43 mins after shipping. I used to be running when I heard her BMW screech into my driveway with the fury of a female whose international view had simply shattered. The pounding on my door seemed like a person attempting to interrupt it down. I calmly activated my protection cameras, made positive my phone changed into recording, and opened the door to find Karen's face contorted in a color of red I didn't know turned into humanly feasible. "This is harassment!" she shrieked, waving. The criminal word "find it irresistible" changed into "on hearth." "That is frivolous. That is insane." "Accurate morning, Karen," I said with practiced calm. "I see you received the notice. You have got 7 days to reply in step with state regulation. You can't just claim me your tenant. That's not how this works." I pulled out my smartphone and showed her protection footage of her repeated storage use. "Sincerely, Karen, it is precisely how involuntary tenancy regulation works. You used my assets again and again, stored your belongings there, and set up a sample of Get Admission To." Looking Karen's entitled self-assurance disintegrate changed into looking a managed demolition. She'd spent goodbye bullying individuals who didn't recognize their rights that she'd in no way encountered a person who without a doubt understood the law. "I used to be simply—" "It was emergency parking," she stammered. 23 separate occasions over 6 weeks, I answered, consulting my documentation. "That is now not emergency parking, Karen. That's normal use of private belongings without permission." Karen's voice reached a pitch that probably scared neighborhood dogs. "I will sue you. I'll have you arrested. I will get you kicked out of this neighborhood." "Experience free to call the police," I stated, gesturing to my protection cameras. "I am certain they'd be interested in reviewing the photos of your repeated trespassing." This is when Karen made her first critical mistakes. Rather than on foot away to consult a lawyer, she decided to increase. Right there in the front of my cameras with best audio recording, she made threats that might appear horrible in court. "You haven't any idea who you're messing with," she snarled. "I've connections. I'll make your existence hell. I will have town inspectors here every week." I just smiled and held up my smartphone. "All being recorded, Karen, but please continue." The conclusion that she became being documented hit her like a slap. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and that I saw the actual Karen. Now not the confident HOA enforcer, but a petty tyrant who'd by no means been challenged. However, Karen wasn't accomplished. Over the next 3 days, she launched a determined scorched earth marketing campaign. She filed lawsuits with the city about my illegal parking shape. She stated my safety cameras as privacy violations. She even called the hearth department, claiming my garage become a hearth chance. Every grievance was extra ridiculous than the last. The Metropolis inspector, who'd already cleared my garage, sent again a shape letter basically pronouncing, "Forestall wasting our time." The hearth department discovered nothing incorrect except Karen's own garage violations. However, here's where Karen's desperation truly confirmed. She began concentrated on my allies. Mrs. Chen obtained 2 new violation notices for immoderate garden ornamentation. The Rodriguez family were given noted for unauthorized children's device of their outdoor. Invoice Henderson turned into threatened with fines for his carrier dog's water bowl. The stunning issue turned into, "We have been prepared." Our communique community lit up each time Karen made a circulate. Photographs, timestamps, witnesses. We documented the entirety with precision. Carlos texted me a photograph of Karen measuring his children's playground device with a ruler at 6 o'clock in the morning. Mrs. Chen dispatched video of Karen screaming at her rose bushes like they'd for my part offended her. Bill evenly recorded Karen arguing together with his service canine approximately municipal water regulations. However, Karen's biggest mistake became underestimating how bored stiff the entire neighborhood had emerged as. Phrase of our prison method unfold like wildfire. Other citizens started out coming forward with their personal Karen horror tales and documentation. By way of Thursday, Karen had managed to show herself from the community enforcer into the community pariah. Her desperate attempts to intimidate us had backfired spectacularly, growing a paper path of harassment that would make any legal professional salivate. The odor of autumn leaves stuffed the air as I watched Karen's guide community fall apart. Even her usual allies have been starting to distance themselves from her more and more erratic behavior. She had 5 days left to reply to my observe, and as a substitute of getting felony advice, she was digging herself deeper right into a hollow with every desperate circulate. Karen changed into about to study that, while you declare battle on someone who knows the law, you hire ensure you can win. I blinked slowly, processing the sheer audacity. She'd without a doubt known as Nation Housing Government and filed fake reports claiming I was going for walks in unlawful condo operation. "I'm sorry," I stated, pulling out my telephone to begin recording. "But that is a single-family house. I stay right here alone." Aaron's face lit up with arrogant delight. "Then give an explanation for why you've been disturbing hire from residents of this network." There it was, Karen's lure. She was being smart, the usage of my criminal word against me. In her twisted good judgment, if I used to be stressful rent from her, I should be operating an illegal condominium business. The housing inspector appeared confused. "Sir, do you hire out portions of your property?" "No," I spoke back lightly. "However, I do have an involuntary tenant who's been the use of my garage without permission for 6 weeks. Heron's smugness faltered. "This is no longer. You cannot simply clearly," I persevered, addressing the inspector. "Below country landlord. Tenant law, repeated unauthorized use of private property can set up a tenancy relationship." I showed the inspector my documentation, safety photos of Karen's repeated garage use, timestamps, photos of her non-public objects stored in my garage, the criminal be aware Rick had organized. "This lady has been trespassing again and again," I defined. My research revealed that her pattern of use certainly made her my involuntary tenant under state law. The inspector studied my documentation with growing hobby. "Ma'am," she said, turning to Karen, "did you document a fake file approximately unlawful boarding house operations?" Karen's face went through several color modifications earlier than deciding on a sickly color of inexperienced. "I used to be just network safety. He's harassing citizens." "Ma'am, submitting fake reports with state groups is a serious offense," the inspector said firmly. "This appears to be a personal assets dispute, no longer a housing code violation." The female with the digicam, probable a non-public investigator Karen had employed, quietly began backing closer to their vehicle. Even she ought to see this become going sideways rapid. However, right here's wherein Karen made her biggest mistake. Instead of slicing her losses, she doubled down with a screaming meltdown that became fantastic, even via her standards. "This is all lies," she shrieked. "He is manipulating you. I am a respected member of this network. I've been at the HOA board for 8 years. The inspector stepped again as Karen's voice reached glass-breaking levels. "Ma'am, I'm going to want you to calm down." I will no longer calm down. "This man is destroying our community. He's a troublemaker. He would not belong right here." And there was Karen's masks absolutely off. Her real feelings approximately who belonged in her community, exposed for each person to listen. The inspector's expression shifted from expert courtesy to apparent pain. Mrs. Chen chose that ideal second to walk over with a plate of cookies in a manila folder. "Officer," she stated sweetly, "I've 2 years of data showing this woman's harassment of aged residents." At the back of her came Carlos along with his very own folder, then Bill together with his provider dog, and a stack of bogus violation notices. Within Minds, Karen was surrounded via friends with evidence of her systematic abuse. The inspector looked around at this impromptu proof presentation, and then back at Kieran, who became still ranting about assets values. "Ma'am," the inspector stated to Karen, "I think you want to leave now." As Karen's hired assist beat a hasty retreat to their automobiles, she made one very last danger that sealed her destiny. "You have not heard the closing of this. I'll have you all evicted. I will name immigration." The inspector held up her hand. "Ma'am, stop speak me. You're making this a lot worse for yourself." Erin ultimately appeared to realize she changed into standing in a hole she dug herself. Surrounded by witnesses and recording gadgets, having just threatened multiple citizens with harassment based on perceived immigration repute, the odor of autumn air blending with the acrid scent of Karen's burning bridges filled my nostrils as I watched her storm again to her BMW. She had much less than 48 hours left to reply to my criminal be aware. And rather than hiring an attorney, she'd just created sufficient proof to bury herself in courtroom. Sunday night arrived with the finality of a decides gavel. Karen had precisely 12 hours left to reply to my legal be aware. And in place of paying or negotiating, she'd selected the nuclear option, calling an emergency HOA board assembly to cope with the disaster threatening our community. The network center became packed like a sold-out live performance. 40-plus citizens stuffed each chair with greater standing along the walls. I noticed a reporter from the local newspaper within the returned corner, camera prepared. Phrase had spread about Karen's extraordinary meltdown with the housing inspector, and seemingly half the community wanted front-row seats to the finale. Karen sat at the pinnacle desk with the last 3 board members, looking like a popular getting ready for her last stand. Her flawlessly styled hair changed into showing stress cracks, and her usual confident smile have been changed by means of the tight-lipped expression of someone who knows they may be approximately to face a firing squad. "This emergency assembly," Karen announced, her voice echoing through the room with pressured authority, "has been referred to as to address the disruptive and litigious behavior it truly is threatening the very basis of our network." She gestured dramatically in my direction. "Jake Thompson has been harassing board members, submitting frivolous criminal claims, and trying to extort cash from longtime citizens through intimidation procedures." A murmur ran via the gang. Karen was gambling to her base, looking to frame this as a community vest or outsider narrative. However, she'd made one critical miscalculation. She did not know about our documentation community. I stood up slowly, Rick beside me with a briefcase complete of proof. "Can also I respond to those allegations?" Karen's smile was venomous. "Mr. Thompson, this is a closed board assembly. Residents can also study, however, now not participate until invited to speak." "Genuinely," said board member Patricia Martinez, who'd clearly grown tired of Karen's power journeys. "Any resident has the proper to address the board in the course of emergency conferences. It's in our bylaws." Karen's face flushed purple, but she could not argue along with her very own rules. "Nice, but keep it brief." I walked to the front of the room, feeling each eye on me. The fluorescent lighting fixtures hummed overhead, blending with the anxious electricity of 40 acquaintances who'd been ready years for this moment. "Thanks." I started pulling out my cell phone. "I would like to start by gambling a few audio from Friday's incident with the country housing inspector." The room went dead silent as Karen's voice stuffed the audio system. I'm able to now not loosen up. "This guy is destroying our community. He's a troublemaker. He would not belong right here." Then came the immigration threats. Crystal clear in high-definition audio. The room collectively winced as they heard their HOA treasurer threatening citizens based totally on perceived immigration fame in the front of a government legitimate. "That is taken out of context," Karen shrieked, jumping to her toes. "I was protecting our network." "From what?" I asked flippantly. "From me legally worrying higher for your unauthorized use of my garage." I pulled out Rick's criminal documentation and started studying. "Karen Whitmore has used my storage without permission on 23 documented occasions over 6 weeks. She saved personal property and HOA components on my property, below nation landlord-tenant regulation. This establishes an involuntary teeny dating." The crowd turned into placing on every word. Mrs. Chen stood up within the back, maintaining her manila folder like a weapon. "Can also I upload something?" She known as out sweetly. Karen regarded panicked. "This is not the time." "Permit her speak," said board member David Kim, who'd seemingly decided Karen had dug her personal grave deep sufficient. Mrs. Chen walked to the front with the practiced grace of someone who'd testified at town council conferences for many years. "I've 2 years of documentation displaying Karen's systematic harassment of aged citizens, families with kids, and all and sundry she decided didn't belong on this neighborhood." She opened her folder and started out studying violation notices, immoderate garden gnome displays, unauthorized bird feeding stations, incorrect cultural decorations for the duration of holiday celebrations. The gang became getting restless. Humans have been whispering, pointing, honestly spotting their own harassment experiences in Mrs. Chen's testimony. Carlos Rodriguez stood up next. "She fined us $200 because my daughter drew hopscotch squares with chalk." Invoice Henderson's voice carried from the lower back. "She attempted to make me pay $50 due to the fact my carrier canine's water bowl turned into an unapproved outside fixture." One after the other, citizens began standing up and sharing their Karen's testimonies. The floodgates had opened, and 8 years of suppressed anger and frustration got here pouring out. Karen attempted desperately to regain manipulate. "This is character." Assassination. I've served this network faithfully for 8 years. This is when the reporter spoke up. Mrs. Whitmore, are you able to touch upon the fake reviews you filed with Metropolis and country companies? The room erupted. Cameras had been flashing. Neighbors had been shouting questions. Karen seemed around wildly, understanding she changed into completely surrounded via opposed witnesses and documentation of her abuse. Board member Martinez known as for order. Given the allegations provided this night, I motioned for Karen Whitmore's on-the-spot suspension from the HOA board pending a complete investigation. Seconded, stated Kim immediately. All in desire, Martinez known as. 3 hands shot up immediately. Karen's hand remained conspicuously down. Karen stood there for a second, surrounded by using the ruins of her suburban state, searching like a dictator who simply realized the revolution had succeeded. This is not over, she said quietly. But her voice carried no authority anymore, simply the whole desperation of someone who'd lost the entirety. As Karen amassed her matters and walked in the direction of the go-out, Rick leaned over and whispered the proper mic drop line. Mrs. Whitmore, you've got until midnight to pay the $350 in again rent, or we document eviction proceedings first issue Monday morning. The sound of her heels clicking on the linoleum floor echoed through the silent room, as Pine Ridge's 8-year reign of terror sooner or later came to an quit. At 11:47 p.m. that Sunday night time, precisely 13 minutes before my legal cutoff date, I heard the familiar purr of Karen's BMW pulling into my driveway one final time. But this wasn't the entitled Karen who'd first invaded my garage months in the past. This become a broken woman clutching an envelope like it contained her soul. Via my protection cameras, I watched her walk slowly to my door. Her perfect posture in the end, showing the burden of her mind-blowing downfall. The knock became smooth, nearly apologetic. Once I opened the door, Karen stood there with crimson-rimmed eyes and an envelope in her trembling hand. The money, she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. $350 coins. I opened the envelope and counted the bills, all there down to the last greenback. Thanks, Karen. This settles your back hire. She nodded stiffly and grew to leave, however, then stopped. For only a moment, I notioned she would possibly make an apology or acknowledge the harm she'd brought about. As an alternative, she said, "You may not be seeing me anymore. I'm moving to Florida subsequent month." And much like that, Karen Whitmore disappeared into the nighttime, leaving Pine Ridge all the time. The on-the-spot aftermath turned into like watching a neighborhood wake up from a horrific dream. Within 48 hours of Karen's resignation, the HOA board referred to as an emergency audit of all fines amassed during the last 2 years. They found Karen had pocketed over $4,000 in unauthorized citations, cash that legally belonged to the network fund. The control company straight away refunded every bogus exceptional Karen had issued. Mrs. Chen got lower back her $3,000. The Rodriguez-owned family recovered their $200. Invoice Henderson become refunded for his provider canine violations. Even I got back the $150 Karen had tried to extort from me along with her fake violations. But the real transformation turned into inside the community itself. With Karen gone, neighbors commenced speaking to each other again. Kids performed of their yards without worry of violation notices. Mrs. Chen's garden gnomes back to their posts like tiny sentinels, celebrating victory. A brand new HOA board led by Patricia Martinez implemented what they referred to as the Karen protocols, transparency requirements, board vote mandates for all citations, and a community ombudsman to save you future abuse. They even hooked up a suggestion field on the community center for citizens to file harassment without fear of retaliation. 3 weeks after Karen's departure, something beautiful happened. I used to be operating in my storage, my garage ultimately and absolutely mine, when Mrs. Chen knocked on the door. "Jake, Connie," she said, sporting a plate of self-made cookies that smelled like heaven. "We are organizing a block birthday celebration for next Saturday. Will you assist?" That block birthday party have become the primary annual Pine Ridge community pageant. 50 households showed up. Carlos introduced his well-known barbacoa. Invoices Carrier Canine were given belly rubs from a dozen kids. Even the reporter from the local newspaper came returned to put in writing a follow-up tale approximately community restoration. However, the best component, we raised sufficient money to install a playground where Karens liked aesthetic requirements as soon as prohibited kids' laughter. The children find it irresistible, and their satisfied screams echo via the neighborhood every afternoon like a symphony of freedom. 6 months later, I were given a name from an attorney in Tampa. Seemingly, Karen had tried her old hints in her new Florida network, concentrated on an elderly Cuban circle of relatives with bogus violations. However, this time, her victims have been geared up. They'd observed my tale online and used my prison approach to show the tables on her. Involuntary tenancy. The legal professional chuckled over the phone. Splendid approach. Karen's been their tenant for 2 months and would not even realize it yet. Some matters in no way change. As for me, I started out a small consulting enterprise assisting different groups deal with HOA abuse. Turns obtainable are Karens anywhere, and the general public do not know their rights. My website, fightyoua.com, receives hundreds of visits from determined owners seeking out hope. Knowledge nugget quantity 4. Community bullies rely on isolation and lack of know-how. But while buddies unite and apprehend their legal rights, even the maximum entrenched tyrants may be defeated. Each morning, I still have my espresso in my grandmother's kitchen, looking at her image on the windowsill. However, now I am not failing her memory. I am honoring it. She'd be proud to realize her grandson found out to fight city corridor, or in this case, HOA hell. The storage still smells like motor oil and forgotten goals, but now it additionally holds the candy-heady scent of victory. Karen's BMW may be long past, however, the prison precedent stays. Park in someone's garage lengthy sufficient, and you may just become their tenant. So what's the pettiest aspect an HOA has ever completed to you? Drop your stories inside the comments beneath. I examine every single one, and now and again they emerge as case studies for my consulting work. And what's up, in case you enjoyed looking Karen get her comeuppance through the energy of real regulation, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, I am telling you approximately the Walmart manager who tried to make organization policy disappear. A Karen who desired to return a turkey skeleton on Black Friday. Consider me, you might not want to overlook that.